Kyle Ledbetter, Michigan has advanced to the national championship game, but is this Jim Harbaugh's final game as a Michigan Wolverines head coach?
Well, Jim Harbaugh was asked this exact same question in the post-game locker room, and he had the well-scripted answer. He's got a couple of these really funny, well-scripted answers that he's prepared for. And they said, "Will this be your last game coaching Michigan?" And Jim Harbaugh's response was, "My future consists of a plane flight back to Ann Arbor, Michigan." And he gave a no-comment answer on it. There's been a lot of no comments for Jim Harbaugh in the past few weeks. And the answer is yes. 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 Win or lose, which I think they'll probably win or lose, this will be Jim Harbaugh's final game coaching the Michigan Wolverines because it's just too uncomfortable, man. It's just too uncomfortable there at Michigan. And Jim Harbaugh, as you, a San Francisco 49er fan, is well aware, Jim Harbaugh doesn't like uncomfortable. He does not like when things get uncomfortable, and he is going to get out of there, win or lose, because this is finally the year. This is finally the year that an NFL team is going to finally give him a shot. He has been pandering, trying to get back to the NFL for 5 years. He has not had the reputation to pull it off. This is finally the year that a team is going to look at Jim Harbaugh and say, "We will hand over the keys to our organization to you, coach who turned around the University of Michigan," despite the fact that if the game didn't get canceled due to COVID in 2020, Michigan might have fired Jim Harbaugh 3 years ago. And in those 3
Yeah.
years, he has been given a second chance. He has turned around his reputation. And now a poor sucker NFL franchise like the Chargers or Raiders is probably going to give Jim Harbaugh the keys to their organization.
Hold up here. Poor sucker? Why?
Because organizations that I keep hearing connected to Jim Harbaugh every time are sucker organizations. It was the Vikings. It was the Dolphins. It's the Raiders. It's the Chargers. These have been sucker organizations who try and go after Jim
Oh,
Harbaugh over the years.
okay. But like, is that more of an indictment on Harbaugh, or are you just saying it is the organization?
No, I'm saying the organizations are suckers.
Okay,
Look,
because
every single look.
yeah, my pushback here is I think Jim Harbaugh's a great coach, and I don't see like why we should discount like what he's done because he's won literally everywhere he's went. That's something that not a lot of head coaches can
Yeah,
say at both levels. That is so damn impressive. And I think that if you are organization that hires him, you're not a sucker. You're changing that reputation. You're like wiping away the sucker reputation from your name if you hire Harbaugh because he's the right coach to hire. Like this hiring cycle, you look at the potential options, he deserves to be the number one head coaching candidate on the market because he's has a proven track record. His firing from the Niners, not an indictment on him, other than the fact that he had a terrible reputation with Trent Baalke at that particular time. And is Trent Baalke a great GM? Hard to say. You know, he's lucked into certain situations. He goes to Jacksonville. He ends up with Trevor Lawrence. Okay. But, you know, you go to Michigan, and Michigan was at its lowest point as a football program. Yet here they are, you know, in 2023. And again, they're in a national title picture. And they've been for the last 3 years. And if they would have fired him 3 years ago, that would have been a mistake on Michigan's part. You know, hindsight being 2020, was a mistake would have been a mistake on Michigan's part because they also weren't happy with just being 10 wins each year at that point. Because yeah, the COVID season was a total bomb. It was a disaster, but the COVID season should not have buried any coach really when we look back on it. That was a once in a lifetime terrible season for a lot of coaches that year.
but you know that there were reasons before that that Jim Harbaugh was set to be fired. And this is what's going to be so unique if and when Michigan wins the championship. There has never been, in the last 50 years of college football, there has never been a coach given a longer leash to eventually turn it around than Jim Harbaugh has had at Michigan. A coach in year 9 is very rarely ever winning their first national championship. You can go down the line through the coaches, whether it was Pete Carroll at USC, it took him 4 years. Nick Saban at Alabama, it took him 4 years. And so it's a unique, it's not an indictment of Harbaugh.
I was going to
It's not
say,
an
can we
indictment
put
of
an addendum that at a high level program? Because
Yes,
there's a lot
and
of coaches like Kurt Ferentz who have been around for ages and
Oh, no,
won a
no,
national
who have
title.
won who win a national title in year 9. Who win a national title in year 9. It does not happen that way under normal circumstances. And part of the reason why Jim Harbaugh got that leeway is because Michigan knew how down bad they were when Harbaugh got there. They knew Harbaugh was too good for them when he first took that job. They remember that. They knew he was too good for them when he first took that Michigan job. They were down so bad. He was a Super Bowl winning head coach, and he took a job for a previously 4-8 program. Like, they knew he was too good for them when he took the job in the first place. And he's Michigan's favorite son. He's the former quarterback. His dad used to coach at the school and has a burger named after him at the restaurant that he allegedly paid for 2 recruits and got the 3-game suspension earlier this year. Like, Jim Harbaugh is in this position to win a national championship, in part because he got a longer leash than any other coach. And that's not an indictment of Harbaugh. They did eventually figure it out. They got the right assistants in the door. They started recruiting 4-star players, and the NIL era kind of spread out the 5 stars to level the playing field a little bit, where guys who used to always go to Georgia and Alabama were now going to a blend between Georgia and Alabama and Texas and Florida State and Texas A&M and Ohio State and all the different schools. All 30 players were getting spread out a bit more in the NIL era. It's not an indictment of Harbaugh. I want to put that out there. He got a longer leash than any other coach, but he's been trying to find his way back to the NFL for 9 years now. And he knew from the start he was going to have to turn it around at Michigan to find his way back. And he did that in 2018. And every offseason since, there has been a story of Jim Harbaugh reaching out to NFL clubs trying to get an interview. 2 years ago, he had a 7-hour interview with the Vikings, and the Vikings turned him down. He's been connected to the Dolphins when it was Tom Brady and his now agent, Don Yee, who he just hired 2 days ago, the agent of Tom Brady and the agent of Sean Payton, and has connections to Michigan. The NFL agent who was trying to work the door to get Harbaugh from Michigan to Miami with Stephen Ross, who happens to own the Dolphins and is the University of Michigan's biggest donor. It was the Raiders a couple years ago who should go after Harbaugh. The Chargers are getting in the door on Harbaugh. Like,
Yeah.
he's been trying to get to the NFL for years now. And because he always had that stable job at Michigan, he was always able to keep getting more chances and continue to build that reputation. Michigan was close to firing him, but they stuck with it. And now at year 9, they're going to win a championship in a way that is an anomaly in history. Even Dabo Swinney, who's like the most lightning in a bottle champion coach in college football history, took him only 6 years to turn that thing around. It's such a unique situation that Harbaugh finds himself in. And because of Connor Stallion's sign stealing scandal, because of the suspension over the hamburgers earlier this year, he's going to get out of Michigan, because just as year 9 and everything's starting to go great for him is right as it's starting to get real uncomfortable at Michigan, because he's been suspended for half of their games this season.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. But yes, this is definitely going to be Jim Harbaugh's final game, because these NFL teams can't resist the idea of a national champion college football coach who actively wants to go to the NFL, because you can't get Nick Saban in the NFL no matter how much you paid him. Nick Saban left the NFL to go to college. You can't get these college champion coaches to come to the NFL unless something has gone wrong. And something is going wrong for Jim Harbaugh right as he's about to become champion head coach in college football.
But it's more than that, because Jim Harbaugh is not just potentially a national championship college football head coach. He's a head coach that's been to the Super Bowl in the NFL. That's something that's always on his resume. You can never take that away from him. 3 straight NFC championship games. When he first came into the Niners, no one knew what to expect. But when he came in, he really changed the attitude of that team. I think what you expect you'll see from whatever team he goes to, you're going to see a physical team. You're going to see a team that likes to run the ball. Which team does that fit better at this particular point? Well, you look at the Raiders, the Chargers, you mentioned both those teams. The Raiders, if Josh Jacobs is still there, I think that he could really do some work there. Unfortunately, again, they got to figure out the quarterback situation. Maybe they fix it with a Kirk Cousins, or maybe they just trade a lot of assets to go draft someone. With the Chargers, what you like about them is you have the quarterback figured out, and now they got to fix that running game, because Austin Eckler, love the talent, but he's not exactly what I would call a Jim Harbaugh running back. I think he'd be a great piece, and maybe, who knows, maybe they draft Blake Corum at some point in next year's draft if Jim Harbaugh goes there. They need to fix like that physicality. Harbaugh's not necessarily going to fix your defense, but he's going to bring in assistants that will fix that defense. And actually, one thing that's been noteworthy with the Chargers in recent weeks, since Brandon Staley has been fired, their defense actually has been playing better. So maybe, who knows, it was all coaching there. And with that said, you bring in a better coach, a high-level head coach like Jim Harbaugh versus Brandon Staley. In theory, that should be an instant upgrade. That's kind of what we talked about with the Broncos. And yeah, they're not a playoff team this year, but we did see the improvements moving from Nate Hackett to Sean Payton. I think we would see the improvements moving from Brandon Staley to Jim Harbaugh instantly. Again, I think the Raiders need more work right now, just given their quarterback situation. They like the defense. I think the challenge for the Raiders in particular, though, they have this kind of like weird reputation following them. Obviously, they went high-level head coach, or big name head coach, I should say, with John Gruden, giving him that 10-year deal. Didn't work out because of the email scandal. They have their interim coach comes in, leads into the playoffs. They don't hire that guy. They go with Josh McDaniels, another high-profile head coach. Doesn't work out, mostly because Josh McDaniels is a bad head coach. They fire him. Antonio Pierce comes in. It's not going to lead them to the playoffs, but, players like him. And it does seem like, there's a lot of people vouching for him or caping for him to get that job. So if Jim Harbaugh comes in, he's going to have that. Well, is he better than at least Antonio Pierce? I mean, I believe he is, but that he's going to have to overcome that challenge, obviously, early in the season. And I think for the Raiders, if things don't work out in year one, you're going to have a lot of that narrative. The only difference there is I think Mark Davis, for all his faults as a owner, as a person who decides on how he gets his haircut, he's willing to give you a big contract if you're a coach of his. He's willing to give you that 10-year deal. He's willing to give you hundreds of millions of dollars. We saw Michigan said they're going to give him a $100 million deal. Mark Davis will match that. Will Spanos match that? We'll see.
I want to put this out here because I know I always sound like a hater when the Jim Harbaugh stuff comes up. And I just want to reiterate, I'm not a hater. It's just weird. All of it is weird. But I just want to say, it totally could work. It totally could work. However, these are some sucker organizations that he keeps trying to get these jobs with. Sean Payton is a Hall of Fame head coach in the NFL. And I didn't think that the Broncos thing is going to work. When they first hired Sean Payton, I was like, I don't think this thing is going to work the way that they think it's going to. It could work. It could not. All of these head coaching hires are random and crazy. I thought Sean McVay was a terrible hire. What the hell are you doing hiring this 30-year-old nobody to be your head coach after Jeff Fisher? I thought it was ridiculous. And it turned out to be a great hire. I don't know what makes a great hire.
Yeah.
I don't know what will end up being successful. It totally could work, and there's tons of factors at play.
But can we acknowledge that not oftentimes when you are hiring one of these head coaches, do they come in never having a losing record in the NFL through at least 4 seasons? Like, how many other times can you say that? Like, about any coach hired in the last 10 years?
It's totally fair. There's a reason why it's been 10 years since someone has wanted to go after Jim Harbaugh. Like, it's just weird, man.
Not wanted, but you mentioned the situations like he had the 7-hour interview with the Minnesota Vikings and then didn't end up getting that job. You mentioned he was talked about with the Lions job, didn't end up getting that job, didn't end up getting the Raiders job for whatever reason a couple years ago, the Dolphins, whatnot. With those respective teams, are they better for not hiring Jim Harbaugh? Mike McDaniel, okay, it worked out, but as mentioned, it took like a couple of plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D options to get there. Okay. Kevin O'Connell, I guess if you ask Vikings fans after what happened in week 17, starting Jaron Hall, the rookie, they might say, man, would Jim Harbaugh have made that decision? I don't know. We could have still been in the playoff picture potentially. The Raiders, obviously, it didn't work out with Josh McDaniels, right? Like, I think the Raiders probably should have pursued him that year in particular instead of wasting time with the McDaniels era. And Detroit, okay, it's working out with Dan Campbell. It took a while to get there too. So, it's hard to say, but like, I think that it was a mistake for any team that didn't consider him or strongly pursue him that needed to hire a coach in the last 10 years. I mean, how many one and done head coaches did we see, right? Over that time, you could have just split the middlemen and just hired Jim Harbaugh at that point. And yeah, his coaching stock wasn't necessarily high at, let's say, 2018 with Michigan, but he would have probably been a better head coaching hire than Freddie Kitchens, right? Who got hired at one point during that tenure.
And you're underlying the point with all of this is like all these coaching hires could work. They could not. Like all of them you have to have a vision for what the coach is going to be. The coach has to enact the vision and do the little steps along the way to get you to success. That is ultimately the best model for coaching success for people who are all very qualified to be NFL coordinators and NFL coaches and college head coaches and things along those sorts. They have been prepping and training for that position for years and years and years. Doesn't always mean it's going to lead to success. There are way more factors at play than just a head coach who comes in and is going to fix everything.
I'm just saying, Adam Gase got 2 head coaching jobs in the time that Jim Harbaugh has been out of the NFL.
Yeah. If Adam Gase had gotten a job that wasn't with 2 of the worst organizations in the world, maybe he would have lasted a little bit longer at those jobs. Like, who knows? Like, there's so many factors at play with all of this stuff. The examples that we brought up are good ones. The ones that Jim Harbaugh had been thirsting for those jobs, whether it was the Vikings, which everyone's like, we're kind of okay. Detroit turned out great with Man Campbell. Dolphins, despite all of their chances to try and throw it away, have turned out pretty good with Mike McDaniel. And the Raiders have flopped and the Chargers have flopped. Like, yeah, it's there's only but so much these hires can do to succeed. And Jim Harbaugh could totally work with the Raiders or the Chargers or whoever else is going to be in the game for Jim Harbaugh. It's just everything around Jim Harbaugh is weird. It's always been weird. Weird that he's thirsting for these NFL jobs.
It's weird, but
weird
successful.
That he stuck around at Michigan.
Weird, but successful.
It only got successful in year 7, 8, and 9, and it also is getting successful.
I'll push back because even then, and this was always part of the argument with Michigan on when they were considering firing Harbaugh, is they were still good.
Yeah,
they weren't winning the Big Ten every year. They were getting their ass kicked by Ohio State, sure, which is not a great look for Michigan, but they were winning every other game that wasn't Ohio State in some years, So
yeah.
That's the thing with the Michigan firing Harbaugh argument, it was not because Michigan wasn't winning. They just weren't beating Ohio State. They just weren't winning the Big Ten. They were winning 10 games. They were winning 9, 10 games every year. You can argue, is that great in college football? No. Is it great for one of the highest paid coaches in college football? No, but it wasn't terrible. It wasn't Rich Rodriguez out there.
Of course, but Harbaugh was never going to be that because, again, he was too good for that job when he first took the job. Jim Harbaugh was the Super Bowl winning coach who never had NFC winning coach of the 49ers who never had a losing record. He was too good for that job when he first took it, and he turned them around and got them back to respectable, and he did it relatively quickly. He did that within like 3 years, which is, by the way, what you should expect when you bring in a coach who believes he should be an NFL head coach the entire time and has a track record of proven success at the places he's gone. But the thing that's interesting now is that as it reaches the national champion level of good, as they rebuilt the program through the pandemic, brought in completely new recruits, a new quarterback who has now, if he wins the game on Monday, JJ McCarthy will finish with the best winning percentage of any quarterback since they were playing in black and white film in the history of college football with the 28-1 record. Brought in a new quarterback, brought in new running backs, brought in new everything, and it became a champion good team with them staying together for 3 years. It's a great example of how to build a program. It was just Harbaugh getting a second chance once they kind of came together and said, well, you're not getting anything better than us. We're not finding anything better than you. So they agreed to the reduced salary contract on Harbaugh at the end of the 2020 season. Seen the massive success that has come since. Harbaugh had took a program that did one of the hardest things you can do in college football, which is go from that 10 win a year plateau to that 12 to 13 win a year plateau. Only a handful of coaches are able to do that. And that's why Jim Harbaugh is now back in the conversation for NFL jobs, and it's not a conversation that has just been started by him. But granted, we've gone through now 20 minutes of talking about Jim Harbaugh and haven't brought up part of the reason why he wouldn't stick around at Michigan for that 10-year contract, which is suspended for hamburgers, Connor Stalions sign stealing scandal, all of the discomfort around the University of Michigan and whether or not he'll get another suspension from the NCAA, or whether or not there's going to be more investigations and more of him having to lie, and all of the stuff around Michigan that might make Jim Harbaugh, who doesn't like discomfort more than the common man, he might want to just book on out of there the same way that Pete Carroll booked on out of USC when that whole thing was coming to an end, the way that Urban Meyer, who got retirement and leave on his own terms at Ohio State, even though we know why Urban Meyer was no longer the coach at Ohio State, got to take off to the NFL. He's kind of in that uncomfortable position, and that would be the incentive for him to make the jump to the NFL in the year that he happens to have the best team in college football. It took him 9 years to get there, but he does have the best team in college football. They should win the championship. And when they do, he will have accomplished that goal. It will be regarded as a massive success for the rest of his life. And after 9 years of grinding away to get Michigan back to the promised land, he will now jump to the NFL, where, like I said before, a likely sucker organization is going to think that Jim Harbaugh is going to turn it around. And again, he just might, but he also just might not.
30 seconds. Chargers, Raiders, which one? You're Jim Harbaugh.
If I'm Harbaugh,
sign a contract.
If I'm Jim Harbaugh, I am Chargers because, oh God, that's tough, man. Oh God. Chargers because you have the quarterback. Raiders, though, would give you more power within the organization, I think. God, that's tough. Yeah, I'll go Chargers. I'll go Chargers. If you're giving me those two terrible, terrible options, I will go with Chargers.
All right, guys. Well, Jim Harbaugh should have never left NFL head coaching conversations, for the record. But what do you think? Where do you think he ends up? Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on all our social medias. From Juge and Kyle, stay safe, happy, and healthy. We'll see you next time.